everything.
Hey, tonight is what tonight is. They'll have their time Monday. You give them the 2 minutes. You give them each 2 minutes. Because this whole thing that we're going to discuss now should have happened weeks ago.
Life.
Yep. Yep, that's what I'm gonna do is that's how I'm gonna start it out and set it up.
You gotta get a remote for that deal.
Yeah, I talked to Dane and see if there's an easier way to do it. I can do it online, but it's not clean, so.
I was so busy today, I forgot to do my expanded agenda.
Well,
I'm like,
it's not like it's gonna be that.
no.
Is the,
I was just hoping you'd take good notes.
resolution gonna stay on?
What resolution? It was part of the agenda.
What?
It is on the one that's printed off, so,
No, that's gonna be on Monday probably.
okay.
It's not the one we had posted.
It's not the one we posted on the window, which means I don't think it should be the one we use, but
I think we gotta go with what, if we have a conflict of posting, we have to go.
what was on the window, what was most publicly available.
What was on the window?
Just budget presentation.
So,
And
I spoke
besides,
with Brett anyway, and he advised we do this on the ordinance if we're gonna do it that way.
you're talking about new business A?
The resolution.
Yeah,
That you want to axe that then, or table that?
it is off.
it is off.
Oh,
It's printed on the ones that she printed out.
Yep.
Okay.
But I'm gonna clarify
So that
that
was
right
from
away.
what we didn't post that update to the window.
Oh,
I think
gotcha.
since the window is the most publicly available one,
Okay,
we'd go with that one.
This is my favorite piece.
so then when you approve the agenda, it's not gonna be on, it wouldn't technically be on.
Correct.
Hey, I caught a couple of grammatical errors in your,
No, you did not.
the hell I did not.
And where? I read it line by line by line.
No, there was a couple, I can't remember what they were, there were squiggly lines on my computer, the only reason I caught them.
he didn't catch it.
No, computer caught them.
Those are suggestions.
They were blue.
Yeah, those are suggestions.
Those are
The red ones
suggestions.
are.
The red ones
Right,
are
the
the
red ones are the
The
ones
blue
you.
ones,
Yeah, the
I
high
think the blue one sounds way better.
Yeah, right.
Hello?
Once again, I'm not seeing the video.
Hello.
It's on.
There you go.
Okay, so it shows here this.
Alright.
It's like a, but I don't know. So. It's fair work.
How'd it go?
Good. Like the basement's getting worked on.
Yours is?
Yeah, but it's got to where it's considered, like on appraisal, it's not considered finished, but on evaluation it is, which is weird. Because as long as it's sheet rock and mud tape,
It's finished?
So there's that.
I don't know how they, but that's what the evaluation, like, Board of Equalization sees it like that. I just asked them about it.
Yeah.
You have a sheet rock taped and textured. Even if there's no flooring down?
There's gotta be some.
I asked, I said, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm asking because in my evaluation, they gave me a square footage, I'm like, you're including my basement, that's not finished.
Finished. Sometimes that does get wrong.
And I think they took an assumption that was my entire basement,
So,
when it's not like half my basement, because the other half is.
with, it's just, what years? So, he's asking about the street.
I went over there before.
Drive.
Sam, I am. How are you?
Tell you what, I tried to go up the steps at the
Football game?
Monday night. Got to that step there where you have to go up into the tower. I couldn't make the step, so bad my knees are.
You could probably referee from like a hover, huh?
Do those things go on grass?
Oh, yeah, you just put some mud tires on them.
Yeah, I just, my knees are so bad, that not bad enough to do anything with, and bad enough not to.
You have to be able to do what you want to do.
Yeah. Yeah, Kent Young, tried to help me out.
Didn't do it, huh?
This was Friday night?
Monday. You know how that press box, why didn't they make it to fit in where the aisles go?
Yeah, because you gotta walk, you gotta scoot through the
Yeah. So I couldn't,
money, brothers.
I couldn't do it. Chad Wolf was sitting there, so he's all, so I think I can get it. And, so then, Kent Young put his hand out to help me up, and he just went down right in my knees. Can't believe it was that bad. Soon eighth grade, we got 30-0, and freshman JV won 6-0.
Who'd they play? Oh, they played. Yeah.
8-6. Yeah, they played us.
Who's played Boston?
One last thing.
I know. I was doing one of these toward the ninth inning, please,
Evidently, because they didn't score enough.
then all of a sudden I wake up, it's 5, they got another red Boston, 2 pitches.
So you had
No one cares.
Kent out there roughing.
What?
Kent was out there roughing.
Was it Monday?
Did they play a freshman and JV or something?
Freshman JV.
Did they?
Play freshman Monday. They said Sunday.
It was
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all for coming tonight. A couple of things on, just on the housekeeping. On the agenda that I have before me, under 3A, new business, there's when I looked on the agenda that was posted on the window, it wasn't on that one. Therefore, we have a discrepancy, and I'm asking that that be removed because notification wasn't given properly. Are we okay with that? Okay. There was a question asked because there's we've noticed the firemen are here, and protocol and how we can best give them the time to talk about some of the things they want to talk to about. The solution that I've come up with is that looking at having them posted on the agenda so there is not a time limit on the input, but that we can get more, they can get more full input on their concerns. Because right now, as it stands, what I look at is under visitors to be heard is about 2 minutes, and I don't think that will be giving them enough time to be heard. And I know this is kind of rushed out, but I'd like somebody to make a motion and to have a second for them to have time to be heard on our next Monday meeting.
So moved. Second.
Mr. Mayor, we need a motion and second approving the agenda prior to that.
Once again, I jump over.
Motion to approve the agenda with the
Amendments,
amendment.
No.
Second.
seconded by Chad Riley. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Before I got out of order, now we're back in. The motion made by Sam and seconded by Billy to put the firemen on the full agenda so that there will be no time constraints or we can give them more time to talk about their concerns. All in favor?
Aye.
Both same sign. Motion carries.
Mr. Mayor, to clarify, that will be for the next council meeting on September 9 at 7 o'clock.
Yes. This was just something where I was having a problem with just making sure that voices can be heard in the community, so I appreciate that. We will go through, and one of the things is that was put out there, and one of the reasons why the fire department wanted to have some speakers, there was a letter that was sent out and given, and I'd like Nate for you to run through that letter before we go on to the budget. Then I'm gonna open it up to visitors to read.
Thank you, Mayor. This statement has been transmitted to local media as well, per their request and per our standard protocol for issues such as this. Last week, the city of Lennox transmitted a letter to the volunteer fire department regarding their request for $106,000 in fiscal year 2020. Since that transmittal of the letter has been shared on social media platforms, and an attempt to misinform residents and deflect from the topic has begun. The statement is intended to give both context for the contents of that letter as well as provide facts as they relate to that letter. With regard to the city's request for an independent audit and financial statements, the city has consulted further with the state of South Dakota on this matter. As a last-minute addition, I've also consulted with the city attorney again, and concur that an audit is not required for a fire department under SDCL Chapter 9. That being said, the city still must receive this information for several reasons. First, and most importantly, the city and all of its employees and officers are legally responsible for every penny that flows through the city's accounts. The budget request that was made by the fire department at the August Finance Committee meeting did not provide sufficient detail with which to be confident that all funding was necessary. If there is any doubt about how those funds will be spent, the city is obligated to deny that request. As a nonprofit organization, the fire department is accountable to the public for all the funds they receive, whether from contributions at the Pancake Feed and Fireman's Dance or from other sources. Ensuring an independent audit occurs each year has been accepted practice for nonprofit organizations for some time, as the public has demanded greater transparency from organizations exempt from taxation. Audits are a healthy way to ensure that organizations have a check and a balance on their finances. Audits protect organizations from waste, fraud, and abuse. Audits are not punishment, but are instead a protection. In fact, the International Association of Fire Chiefs states an annual audit should be performed to measure expenditures from year to year, take a look at prior year's expenditures versus current year's expenditures, and explain fluctuations in expenditures. Fluctuations may occur because of an increase or decrease in demand for services. Knowing why you spend certain amounts helps with budget justifications and approval. Audits simply explain why you spent a certain amount and are not intended to be punitive in any way. While an independent audit is a thorough and time-consuming process, organizations approach them with a willingness to have outside expertise review their financial standing and internal controls simply because they make for stronger organizations and more transparent relationships with funders. Because the City of Lennox recognizes the importance of this transparency, staff offered to include the fire department in the 2018 independent audit performed for the city. That offer to the fire department was never accepted. Additionally, as a 501c3 nonprofit organization, the fire department is obligated to file IRS Form 990 or 990N each year. This is a public document available to anyone who may request it and is meant to provide additional oversight and accountability for nonprofit organizations. Based on a review of the fire department's record, no Form 990 or 990N has been filed with the IRS in the past 3 years. There are serious and significant penalties for failing to file these forms. Each day the filing is late is punishable by a fine of either $20 or $100, depending upon the size of the organization, up to a total of either $10,000 or $50,000 respectively. Organizations that fail to submit a 990 or 990N for 3 consecutive years will result in an automatic revocation of tax exempt status, meaning it no longer is exempt from the federal income tax. There is no appeal for that revocation, and organizations must resubmit to the tax exempt status process for reinstatement. Based on the review of the available records, the fire department has not filed a 990 or 990N in the past 3 years, subjecting them to automatic revocation in the near future. Furthermore, fiscal year 2019 fire department purchases lack the financial control required of all city departments. Current procedures dictate that purchases made by department heads require approval of a finance officer or city administrator that is done on a purchase order form. Of the $52,846.27 spent by the fire department through August 26, 2019, only $7,676.49 of those purchases have received the approval of a finance officer or city administrator. In fact, a large number of purchases are made prior to requesting approval and are reimbursed to either the fire department or fire department personnel. This lack of compliance with well-established procedures indicates a lack of internal controls at the fire department. The fire department's budget request is significantly higher than that of volunteer fire departments throughout Class 2 municipalities in South Dakota. And as a volunteer department rivals that of fully staffed departments within the city of Lennox. A review of the most recently available independent municipal audits for these communities reveals that the average cost per resident for Class 2 municipalities is $29.11. The Lennox Volunteer Fire Department FY 2020 budget request is $44.43 per resident. This is a significant difference between the vast majority of Class 2 municipalities and the Lennox Volunteer Fire Department request. Additionally, a review of recent independent audits and budgets for the city of Lennox shows a 106% increase in the fire department budget over the last 5 years. With regard to funding for self-contained breathing apparatus upgrades, the city again affirms its support for the purchase of this equipment in order to keep firefighters as safe as possible in their duties. However, the prudent method in which to pursue this equipment have not been pursued by the fire department. Nor has the fire department cooperated with requests for information to support those methods. There are 2 clearly responsible ways in which to purchase this equipment. The first is to secure funding from the Federal Emergency Management Agency under the Assistance to Firefighters Grant Program. This grant is a very common source of funding for fire departments making large equipment purchases. In fact, in 2018, FEMA awarded $983,429 to South Dakota fire departments under this grant program. Because the fire department stated they lacked the technical expertise needed to apply for such a grant, the city of Lennox has offered to write and submit the grant for the fire department, so long as technical and financial information could be provided by the fire department. Since that time, the city has attempted to meet with the fire department to discuss and begin work on the upcoming application and the need for technical specifications and financial statements required for a grant. That meeting has not taken place. If grant funding is not available or is denied, the fiscally responsible method for funding these purchases is to rotate the purchase of equipment over several years. In the fiscal year 2020 budget, the city has proposed $30,000 for the purchase of this equipment if the grant is not awarded. However, those funds will not be released until FEMA denies or approves the grant, as those dollars will be necessary for any matching funds under the grant. Additionally, the city stands by its request for quotes from at least 3 vendors prior to approving the purchase of this equipment. This is a common practice for purchases made by the city of Lennox and has been applied as recently as August for the purpose of purchasing a dry prime pump for the sewer department and purchasing new police department equipment. Department heads did not object to this practice as it makes for good and responsible fiscal policy. Regarding the request for an addition to the fire department building, the city has concerns with the fiscal wisdom of adding on to a taxpayer-owned and insured building when significant cost savings may be available in the future under a consolidated building plan. The city currently operates 6 separate buildings to house different departments. These buildings have separate internet and data connections, different heating and cooling systems, and are a variety of ages. There are no current plans to replace any of these buildings. However, if and when the city decides to study this further, such study will include the consolidation of buildings as a cost-saving measure. The city will not consider adding on to any building until further study can be completed on the savings available under a consolidated building plan. Furthermore, the city was assured that when the fire department requested the surplus of 2 fire trucks in 2018, that the sale of those trucks would provide the necessary space needed by the fire department. The request to add on only 1 year later seems ill-timed and inconsistent with past assurances received from the fire department. The last item addressed in the letter relates to the fire department's request for a diesel exhaust system to keep firefighters safe in the fire department building. The buildup of diesel exhaust fumes is very dangerous to the health of individuals, and the city shares this concern. However, to request a diesel exhaust system under the argument that such fumes are highly carcinogenic while still allowing smoking in the building is highly disingenuous. Additionally, smoking in public places is restricted by South Dakota law, is punishable as a petty offense, and the city has restricted the use of tobacco products by employees and visitors so that it is not used in public buildings. As stated in the letter, the city will not entertain this as a serious request until it is assured and confident that smoking no longer occurs in the fire department building as required by city policies and state law. As city administrator must also address the tactics used to dispute the facts in the letter by more than one individual connected to the fire department. Lennox volunteer firefighters and other community members have joked about not responding to a fire at the mayor's residence, have accused and attacked city staff completely disconnected from this discussion of playing a role in the matter, engaged in name-calling, have questioned the integrity of the city's annual independent audit, and have called into question the integrity of the volunteer efforts to raise additional funds for amenities at the new swimming pool. As I have stated to others who have attacked, berated, and demeaned city employees and volunteers in the past, this behavior will not be tolerated. It is shameful, unethical, and immature to make baseless personal attacks on social media against staff and volunteers who have dedicated their time and energy to the benefit of the community. The city of Lennox will not be removing or otherwise commenting on these social media posts. The individuals responsible for the attacks know who they are and know that they are welcome to participate in a thoughtful, informed discussion with city officials at any time. Some have mentioned that I or others are unhappy with the fire department. This is simply not the case. I believe Lennox is served by a group of the best community-minded firefighters around. Lennox Volunteer Fire Department is a source of pride for the community and will be for years into the future. However, when I was hired, I was charged with building accountability and transparency in all aspects of city government. That job cannot be completed without the information needed to ensure that taxpayer dollars are being spent in a responsible manner. As always, the city of Lennox remains prepared to answer any questions and discuss concerns with residents.
As I said before, this is a time for visitors to be heard, and it is open for anybody here to talk to what's been said, but also I understand that maybe this won't give the U.S. individuals time to fully vet and discuss the matters that need to be discussed with this letter. However, it is open to whoever wants to come up to the limit. There's a 2-minute time limit on each individual, with the knowledge that there will be a special time set forth for things to be more fully discussed. So it's open to everybody here.
Can I stand up and address?
Please, Wayne.
I think pretty much everybody knows my name is Wayne Fisher, and I'm the Lennox Volunteer Fire Chief, and I would like to address those comments. Could I please have a copy of that letter? There's a lot of misinformation or things that I don't believe are 100% accurate in there, and I'd like to readdress it. Our budget, and I simply want to work on the budget because that's what this meeting's about. Because I understand that I do not have time to address everything that's here and volumes of other information that we have back at the fire station. In 2018, I met with our city police, fire, ambulance committee. Is that correct? Jackson, you were the chairman of that. And we met, Rob, you were there.
Yep.
We met for the budget for 2019. And in good faith and in good judgment, we met and we talked to each other. We came up with a working number of $106,000. That included that exhaust system with the carcinogens in the city's building. This year you wanted 40% of our budget. Shortly after that, the budget came out for this audio video system for the council. Is that approved for 2019 budget? I'm getting off track. So for 2018, we approved that budget. And all I'm asking for, that was for 2019. All I'm asking for is for 2020. Our needs have not changed except for replacing our SCBA's, which are under the 2002 edition of the 1981-82 NFPA standards. The NFPA standards is not just for fire departments. It's not a National Fire Department Protection Association. It's a National Fire Protection Association standards. It's involved with the water department. They have standards that they must follow also. With them standards, we are looking at the breathability in our fire station, in the city's fire station. When I say the city's fire station, it's as much as me as it is city governance or city employees. I'm city also. These are my guys. And whoever comes after that, you're there to protect us. I appreciate that. I'm more appreciative that you protect my friends, my family, my sons, my nephews, my brothers. And that's what we're looking at. So all we're looking at is to work with a 2020 budget that we had in place for 2019. We understand that the city had issues because of Mother Nature in the streets. We considered for the overall good for the citizens, yes, we can forego that $34,000 exhaust system in the fire station. Because we can open up our doors and we can ventilate that exhaust out of there. Now, as far as the smoking goes, it is your building. Come down and enforce it. It is my building. It is a city building. The ordinances are for the city. If you're gonna start with that building, step outside this door and look around at the weeds. That's an ordinance. Are we enforcing them? Why are we picking on one group? Let me ask you, are we following state law with our finances as an incorporation? Micah did due diligence and search, and the state auditor, I don't know who he talked to, said, yes, you are following state law. Are we following state law? And now, why do we want to isolate the groups? Because, is this, and for lack of better words, I'm looking for words like, is this intimidation, retaliation? Is this harassment? Because you guys don't have the opportunity to come down and look into the incorporation books. And if you're going to treat one organization that receives money from the city of Lennox, treat everybody, whether it's the contractor building the swimming pool, to the employee, to the councilman that is receiving money. You guys going to open up your financial statements to us? Devil's advocate, things to think about. So anyway, I'm over my 2 minutes. I need to stop. I got volumes of information here. I got my filter. And I would love, I need to do a rebuttal on that letter because we have been trying to operate and work with the city council. When I met with the 2020 budget, the last thing I said is we have been writing grants. We have received grants. I've got a folder here with the FEMA grants on it that we've tried to work on before. I have a folder here with the Volunteer Fire Assistance grants from South Dakota, and another grant in there that we're waiting word on. You cannot lie and say that we are not working on trying to receive grants. Where do you get this information? When we met, and you and I met about the budget, you came back and told the city council, I was happy with them cutting our budget 40%. That was not factual. I met with Greg Poppinga, told him the exact same words. I said, I understand it's going to happen because the city of Lennox needs this money. But we're not happy with cutting our budget. Did I tell you that, Greg?
Just to clarify.
And I clarified it at the meeting when he said that he met with you and you said
Just
you were
to clarify, he didn't say happy. He did not say happy. He doesn't like it. They don't like it, but they understand it. He never used the word.
Okay. And
I'm just clarifying.
Sure, absolutely. And I might have been paraphrased with that word because it was in agreement. There was some type of word saying that I was within agreement with that, and that was false. Now all of a sudden we discovered we've got to start fact checking absolutely everything. And if you want to be a responsible government and employee, fact check your facts. I don't know what more to say. I would like for the city council to reinstate our $106,000 budget that we work with. And I would ask that I am on the agenda to speak on behalf of the fire department Monday at Monday's meeting. So, any questions of me?
Thank you. What I would, with the council in that for this forum, we are to receive the information come Monday, then it'll be a more open forum, and then you can have more time for the give and take of talking about that. And it's just noted, and I forgot to bring this up, but I talked to people. This is being recorded and is part of a public record. And I think, given from what I've heard, it'll be appropriate for us to have it on Monday when the formalities are a little bit more looser than a 2-minute frame
Sure.
and that.
Sorry.
Yep, but I think that you need to be heard, and that would be a good time to be heard. And that's why I passed the motion right in the beginning, or I asked for a motion to be passed that would be put on the agenda.
Because with him stating in that letter that I was not willing to meet with the fire committee, you called me, Chad, one day, and I called you back shortly after from the fire department phone and advised you, I'm available, please call me. And when you first made chairman of the police fire ambulance, you also called me, I called you right back, and in both times, and no disrespect, but I did not receive a phone call back on that. We have
This last time when I called you, you told me I had 5 minutes to call you back.
I was at the fire station, yeah.
You told me I had 5 minutes to call you back, and then you were unavailable for 10 days.
That's correct, and you are correct.
Okay, well, I was working.
Right, and I understand
I
that.
didn't get back to you in 5 minutes.
And I understand. Thanks.
Yep, thank you. All right. Any other visitors to be heard?
I just have a question, because I don't know how it works. You guys got that new half-ton pickup, right? Why does that not have to go out for 3 bids? Is that on a state bid too?
One of the parties on the questions, and I've been kind of called to task on that and allowing questions. And what the standard replies.
I can answer.
It's
I helped.
$50,000 bid.
I helped with it. There is a state bid. I called Billions, I called Jerry's, and I called the north town, the place north of town, it's also Billions.
Okay, I did not see
Yeah,
that.
so there was 3 phone calls made, and I don't know, I think we got 1 or 2 proposals back.
Okay, was that in the minutes?
I don't think it has to be in the minutes, the approval's in the minutes.
I want to make sure I'm not missing it. That's what I'm asking.
There was something, because
We approved it.
All I see
Yeah,
was Jerry's got it.
Yeah.
The Billions bid was
No.
comparable, but we decided to stay with Jerry's because they're local business.
All right,
Thank you, guys. Any other visitors to be heard? All right. Thank you all. Look forward to continuing the conversation on Monday, which there will be. All right, moving on. Switch for my note taking. Guidelines, 2019 budget presentation. Nate, would you?
Thank you, Mayor. I have a PowerPoint up in front, just update just a couple of things earlier, a couple hours before the meeting. Just going through some fine tuning. That's all been updated on the board doc site as well, the materials have. Not gonna get into line by line tonight. I think most of that was covered at the finance committee meeting. Though the line by line budget is available on the board doc site for anyone to review. The one you wanna look at is the column to the far right, the E2. Looks like it's a little bit of a Christmas tree. Has green in there for anything that was added to it, and red in there for anything that was subtracted from it. So we're gonna go through a little bit, general fund, a little bit of what some of the larger overall things we're doing with this budget. And then we'll get into some of the enterprise funds and grab a little bit more detail there. In terms of budget objectives, there's really 4 objectives for this 2020 budget. Obviously, we have to balance the general fund. That's a state statute. We don't have an option on that. I think it's good policy anyway, but that's a requirement for us. Second, we want to invest in infrastructure. That's been a very clear message received from council in past, I would say, 9 to 11 months that I've been talking to you. We want to improve the staffing structure. Staffing changes next year. We got a new pool. We got a couple other things going on that in the past year have changed. We want to firm that up a little bit and try something new in terms of how we manage all of our departments. And last but not least, we want to slow our expense growth. If you look at a couple of the prior year budgets, our expenses really ballooned in general fund in particular. And we want to try and switch some of that around and turn it a bit. In terms of significant changes, I have under consider general fund budgeting, and that's not necessarily that we haven't done that in the past. There are small changes that make big differences. One of the things that Denise and I were very cognizant of is not budgeting for grants that we're not confident we'll receive. Last year I think we had $215,000 in grants and state grants in there. We didn't have any pending applications. We didn't have anything that we thought we had a really good shot at. There was no past history to suggest that we would receive those grants. So we really didn't think that, budgeting revenue that we're not confident we're going to receive just isn't a good budgeting practice. So we wanted to move away from that. A staff restructure, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Use of our sales and additional use tax fund. We really have not used that fund to our advantage in terms of use for infrastructure. That is a dedicated fund. In the past, we've used for ambulance and some street projects, but nothing really significant. So we want to change that. We're changing the health insurance plan. We had talked earlier this year, I believe it was a couple months ago, about increasing the employer contribution on the health insurance program and making sure that when we got to budget season, we took a look at what health insurance savings we could get. So that's included in here. We have the addition of a swimming pool. We know a swimming pool is going to lose money. How do we account for that? How do we ensure that swimming pool fund by itself does not continue to go deeper and deeper into a negative fund balance in the future years? Last but not least, we have additional public safety staffing. We've talked before about the police department and what 4 officers really gets a full-time police department, and it just is not enough time to afford officers any opportunity to get away from their shifts. We talk about staff restructure. There's really 2 major changes you're going to see on here. The first one of those is the public works director. In the past, we've had a streets foreman and a streets superintendent and utility superintendent. I believe those positions can easily be handled under one position. We've been doing this for a while now. There's certainly future growth that we can see in those positions, and really all of them. I mean, it's something we can see across all positions is growth and how we manage and how we prioritize. But it's something that I think has been working relatively well, and it's helped us keep an eye on the big picture in terms of infrastructure improvement, keeping on top of projects. You'll notice under there that if we're going to have a public works director, we would also add in at some point in the future a water or wastewater specialist, similar to what we have in the streets department right now with 2 additional staff there. We have not discussed, where that person, what certification level they would come in at, what training they would need. We've thrown numbers around in terms of what budget we might need for that. We've also put in some additional money for that public works director to address the fact that they're taking on additional responsibilities. On the far right of there, just next to the building inspector, you'll see Parks and Recreation Director. This has been something that I've talked to several city council members about, park and rec board members, and the amount of work that goes into managing the park system really year-round is just not sustainable. I think a number of you have served on the park board as well. Probably speak a little bit firsthand about the workload that goes into managing those programs for volunteers, as well as for administrative staff. Several hours each week, I think, for every staff up front. It is spent getting things set, counting cash for the concession stand, ordering concession stand supplies and those types of items. When it comes down to health insurance savings, we looked at two real good options. We looked first at the state pool, which we're already a part of, but we also called in Silverstone Group out of Sioux Falls, headquartered in Omaha, if I remember correctly. The word from Silverstone was essentially, don't bother looking on the private market. We've got plenty of data from them to support that. We just won't find anything that's comparable to what we receive through the state health pool. So right now we're currently with Plan B, which is the upper right-hand portion. The plans on the left side are co-insurance prescription benefits. Plans on the right side are co-pay insurance prescription benefits. So we're currently with Plan B, which at our current employee load costs approximately $136,000 per year. Plan B would take us a bit lower to about $126,000, $127,000 a year, which essentially washes out the increase we had from the decision earlier this year to increase the employer share of that. The unknown here is we don't know if this is going to spur anyone to take the insurance instead of not taking the insurance, to change their coverage in any other significant way. And that's just something we don't know. So it's possible that we can see some small changes there. But overall, this plan is much closer to what you would receive in terms of deductible, co-pays, and out-of-pocket maximums, very close to what you would see in the private market.
Who covers fire department insurance?
Health insurance?
Yeah.
Typically it's employer sponsored. The city does not cover health insurance at the fire department. We do cover workman's comp and any liability insurance for the equipment in the building.
And the workman's,
That is owned by the city.
and the workman's comp is regardless of whether they're in the municipality or 10
Correct.
miles away, doesn't
Correct.
matter, right?
Correct.
Okay.
As long as it's an official, what we would call official business.
Yeah.
Of a typical fire department, I guess I would say.
That also applies for the ambulance and police and.
Yes, yeah. Obviously, the ambulance and police, they are employees, so they would be covered by employer-sponsored health insurance. But in terms of workers' comp or other general liability insurance, it's covered by the state health, by the state insurance pool, health insurance,
South Dakota, Public Assurance.
Public Assurance Association. Overview for the general fund, again, as I mentioned, we wanted to present a balanced budget. You'll see just a slight excess here that simply will be dedicated toward contingency in the final budget. We wanted to minimize expense growth. We also keep the cost of living adjustment to what the state allows us to grow in revenue, which is based on the consumer price index. Widely used to determine cost of living adjustments. Came in at 2.41% from the state this year, and that's what we're going to keep our cost of living adjustments for next year. So general fund overview, you'll see a large spike in the revenue in 2019 compared to 2018. That is approximately just under $200,000, so a lot of that was really made up with the grant funds that were budgeted into last year. When we look at what we have available, we have to ask the state, we have a 2.4%, we also have any carryover CPI that we haven't used from previous years. So we're essentially going to use up our banked CPI from previous years to make this budget work, which I think was somewhere around 4.9% total. So a 2.4 plus a 2.5 banked results in approximately what we would be getting here. So the 2020 revenue growth over 2019 is going to be approximately $17,000. One thing I'm particularly happy with is our expense growth over 2019 at under $10,000. That's less than 1% expense growth year over year. I think given where expenses have been in the past few years, I think it's wise to keep that as a target to minimize that expense growth in the general fund.
General fund, as you know, most of that's made up of taxes, property taxes in particular. There are some sales taxes, license fees, lottery funds, dog licenses, those kinds of things. Those all go into general fund for revenue. The higher those expenses get, the higher that mill levy gets, and we want to make sure that we're staying competitive with other communities around us. We've talked in the past about how we compare to Harrisburg T, a few other communities nearby in property tax mill levies. We already have a higher than average mill levy, I would say, looking at the other communities. But when you take it into account with per capita taxes, we are just slightly lower. I would like to stay there if we can, if possible. The administrative functions, in finance, we have no real significant changes. We did increase the salary and wage due to the finance officer position change, as well as an increase with the administrative assistant. We've looked at the data available from the state salary survey. There's not a ton of good data available from that, so trying to spread that a little bit wider. Again, wage decisions are not really made until the end of the year anyway, so we do have time to firm that up a little bit. In general government, no significant changes. We had originally budgeted for a code enforcement officer, as that's something that's desperately needed. The police department has agreed to take on those duties and kind of run with them in the next few years. So, mayor and council, no significant changes. And the city administrator, that was adjusted to the current contract rate plus the COLA. I also adjusted the travel and conference budget to $4,000. I think in almost every department, our training budget is just not what it should be. If we are going to invest in having quality employees available to us, we need to invest in the continued training as well. This is a chart of general fund administrative functions and the change in this year's budget expenses to the last 2 years. You see finance continues to decline there. General government dipped down last year. It is again higher this year, and we can get to that in details if we need to. Mayor and council is just a couple thousand over what it was 2 years ago. It's down about 6,000 from last year's budget. Most of those savings are coming on things like refining what we charge on the workman's comp rates, refining how many minutes or how many meetings we have, how many special meetings we have, and really basing it on objectives on that. And then the city administrator is based on contract, and then previous years and the increase for travel. The public safety functions, we are adding a police officer in the police department. We're replacing radios. Did learn late last week, after this was all said and done, that the police department found a pretty fantastic lease option that I actually think is going to save us more money than what Will had initially expected. Ambulance department, we had a new wage structure. $2 on-call wage is what we pay right now. What we're changing is that while responding to a call, which is typically 2 hours, we're increasing that wage to $10 while they're on that call. So if they're on a shift and they don't make any calls, they're making $2 an hour for that whole shift. If they're on a shift and they make one call, they're going to receive $2 for every hour that they were simply on call, and $10 an hour for when they were on the call, responding to the call.
What's the projection of the change in the cost?
Hold that up one moment. I believe it was approximately $20,000, but I want to make sure. Alan, do you remember off the top of your head?
I believe it's somewhere in that area. That's also a figure that's kind of relative because it depends on how many calls we run and how many calls are run after hours. It's kind of a stab in the dark, and I did my best to average on years past what we've run after hours and so on.
I think everybody should understand that fluctuates. There's no way to predict it.
Yeah, and you'll see on the chart too, when you look at the ambulance department, the costs continue to rise. By and large, we can't control how many calls we're gonna get, so that simply is every time we respond, that expense goes up. One of the things that Alan and I have also talked about is, reducing that operating loss by 25% in 2020. We're budgeting as is. but taking a goal to reduce that operating loss. 'Cause every call we make, whether it's in town or out of town, we lose money on, to the tune of about $70,000 a year that we then supplement from the second penny in the past.
Thank you.
On the fire department,
Can I ask a question? So what is the plan to reduce the losses?
Alan, you want to speak to that?
Still working on some of that, however, kind of what we're looking at doing is going to neighboring townships and towns who we service and asking them to help foot some of the bill that the ambulance provides for them. The city of Lennox has been doing this for 46 years solely without any significant help from any of the area townships or communities. So that's really where we're looking for it.
Is that how other ambulances operate? Do you know?
As in how?
In going after townships? I mean, we've got 2,500 homes in our district.
In our
That includes Lennox, territory, whatever.
Yep.
Includes Worthing, part of Chancellor, and all the townships. 2,500, okay? And this goes to the fire department as well. There's a lot of cover. But the municipality, 1,100 homes, not even 1,100, probably 1,000 homes, is paying. Okay? And I just want to be fair on the deal. And there's no reason why, if someone's gonna come to my house because I've got a heart attack, which may happen soon, I don't know, I'm getting older, but I know an ambulance is coming, right? And I'm paying about, I don't know what it is, $50 a year per resident or is it?
To run the entire ambulance, our entire budget, divided by how many homes are within our territory, it's about $70 a home.
$70 a home that people in the municipality, who I
But
represent.
That's within the entire 2,500.
Exactly.
So it's not,
So it's more than that.
So it's double it.
Well, right, but I'm just saying is, I'm paying $70 as a resident of this
No, you're
community.
paying about 150.
I'm paying $150 as a resident of this community, that if I go down with something, or my kid falls and whatever, that an ambulance is coming, thank you, Jesus, that you're coming. The message has to be to the townships and those outside, and my dad doesn't live in the city, okay? And he understands my argument, that the service is the same. It doesn't matter how many calls you go on, the likelihood of coming to my house is the same as it would be to going to somebody else that's not the municipality. And right now, they don't pay anything. And I just want to know, why can't we at least help us get to neutral?
And that's what my intention is
Sure,
doing.
and we'll see how that
That's how we're
goes.
You know, looking at it from my side of view, I don't understand how, if we go to them and say, this is what you're getting for this, how they're gonna be able to say, no, it's not worth that. So that's our attention, that's what we're gonna try to do in this.
And I've investigated by asking a number of farmers who have had a terrible year, if you've paid attention to the economy, giving them this scenario, and they're like, that makes complete sense. Why are we, we should, and maybe it's not the full 150, I don't know what that number is, and we're not looking to make money. We're looking to break even, please. That's all we want to do. And I just think it just makes sense. So, appreciate it.
I think what concerns us the most on the administrative side is that Lennox taxpayers are essentially covering taxes for other townships and towns at this point. We do graciously receive some funding from Chancellor and Worthing, but it certainly isn't enough to make up for the amount of coverage that they receive. I'm sure Denise would be more than willing to pay more, and to know that Alan is going to show up to.
Absolutely. I could have a heart attack soon.
This is the chart in terms of ambulance budget. You'll see a $26,000 increase there. Not all of that is staff and wages or salaries and wages. I would say approximately 20 of that is. The Excel spreadsheet is not pulling up for me, but I can get that number for anybody who wants it. You will note on the police department, even with adding a 5th officer, that budget, the expense for that budget went down by $4,000. Where that's coming from is there are significant investments in equipment in the 2019 budget for the police department. We took care of a fair amount of that. We did cut that budget as well, obviously, so not all of that was going to be spent. But adding an officer there is still less expense than what we had budgeted for 2019.
Part of the thing that we were looking at, if I remember right, too, is overtime and the indirect cost of that on the budget, that hiring on the people would cut down on the overtime.
Yes, I expect that we will see a decrease in overtime, with having additional staff available for those calls. I think having a little extra enticement on those calls at least, for the $10 an hour is going to at least help recruitment and going to help covering shifts. If we can get that, I would like to see Alan work significantly less than he currently is, every week.
Can you back up a second?
Yep.
The fire department budget on there now for 2020, that's the green, right? And so-
On the far right, yes.
On the far right. And that doesn't include 30,000 for possible SCADAs.
That does include 30,000.
That includes the 30,000,
Yes.
okay.
This slide is just a closer overview of the ambulance budget. Since we have been talking about the net loss of pay experience every year, this is what we're budgeting for next year. This is a guessing game every year. Some years it's 30,000, some years it's 60,000. It all depends on collectible revenue, uncollectible revenue, how efficient our billing process is through a third-party biller.
Why would there be uncollectible revenue?
Believe it or not, some people just don't pay their bills. Denise and I are going to be talking with our current insurance biller about whether those are currently sent to collections or not. I believe they should be. But that being said, in the medical field, there's still a large percentage of bills that go unpaid.
So the ambulance obviously on calls collects a certain number typically from insurance? Is that how that works?
Depending on the call,
Okay.
depending on what's required on that call, depending on which insurance company it is, depending on what the call actually, whether it's a car accident or it's a heart attack, everything is a variable and they all move.
Sweet.
Also, the other fact is, there's calls that we can't even bill for.
Yeah.
We go out, service the public, we cannot send them a bill for it because it's not allowed by insurance.
What about fire calls? There's like, you get a check, does the Lennox, does the fire department get a check in terms of on a call, or how does that reimbursement work, or don't you get anything?
We don't get anything.
Okay,
Most insurance premiums have a clause in homeowners insurance that may state, if you have a volunteer fire department, we may give you up to such and such amount of money. And that's it. Otherwise, no, there's no billing.
Isn't there, don't most of them have a $500 fire call?
It depends on the insurance, and I really can't speak factually on that because I don't know. I don't even know what my own policy said. If I have a fire in my house, can I ask for my insurance company to donate $500 to the Lennox Volunteer Fire Department Incorporated?
Well, usually on the property declaration page, there's a line item that says fire call $500.
Sounds like you know what you're talking about.
Maybe know a little bit about it, but,
So,
I mean, typically there is, and anymore about 99% of homeowners insurance policy have a $500.
Okay.
If there's a fire call, there's a $500
yeah.
amount. set
and
aside.
regardless of what happens there,
If there's
If
a
the
fire
fire-
call,
right, gotcha.
yeah, and you're the expert in the industry, it sounds like.
well,
So
an expert, you can use that loosely, but,
Yeah.
if there's an actual fire at a residence, typically, they'll pay $500, so you guys show up and put it out. The thought process is you'll save property by showing up.
Right, and we do not bill. I know there are departments in our neighborhood that will send out a bill on their calls that they go on. And I don't know what type of calls, ambulance, fire, hazardous material, rest, whatever it happens to be. I don't know how or why they do their billing, and some of them have told me they just put it out there, and if they get money, that's a bonus. If they don't,
Is that something to consider, or you just don't want to do that, or I guess a better question would be to because I don't know,
right,
to investigate how many fire departments do that.
right.
Does T do that?
And that I don't know.
Okay.
I could not
Okay.
speak, I could not speak on their administration. I do know that there are several ways that fire departments are funded, and there are several different ways just in the state of South Dakota. It would be nice if they're all unified. And I believe, with my understanding, that Aberdeen has a rural and a city fire department. They're totally separate. So, and then some departments, I talked with the ISO representative from Whispering Pines, which is right outside of Rapid City. He was in town here about 3 weeks ago for the ISO survey, and they have a district, and which is allowable by law. So there are a lot of
It's different, yeah,
So-
okay, thanks.
It could be, we could sit here all night.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, Monday night, I'll sit here all
So
night, and I'll
please,
chat with you.
continue to throw the questions
Yeah,
at me, and
sure.
I'll stand up and talk, and you guys sit me down when you want me to sit down.
So, of our $50,000 net losses in the ambulance, what percentage of that is uncollectible billing?
Well, it's hard to pin down, although we are, until Denise was here, we were not tracking what's uncollectible and what our current.
But that we can obviously, that we can do.
I think we can more aggressively go after.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
If you go back to the most recent finance report, you'll see this on the August finance report. The ambulance fund balance is at a negative of $195,000. If you go back to our minutes from, I would say, the early to mid 2000s, we were regularly writing off ambulance losses that were basically uncollectible.
Well, because my question is, can't we take those that are uncollectible and sell them to a collection company?
We can.
I mean, I don't know what you get for them.
And that's something that Denise and I would like to explore with our builder.
Because that's kind of how, that's where some of our second penny was going on the shortfall, right?
That's, yes, second penny, whatever shortfall the ambulance have is covered by second penny,
And
which of course takes
typically
away
the
from
second penny should go where, Nate?
infrastructure.
Thank you.
It is an allowable use, but.
Right, and it's another, again, it's another conversation to have with why we would love to get to a zero balance. And it's not Alan's fault, it's not ambulance's fault, this is the reality of what it is, and we're just trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. Recreation functions, this is taken from a number of different funds, not just the general fund, but I'm talking just in this about the general fund. We'll get to what has been called the baseball softball fund, which we are hoping to rename just recreation fund. Biggest change in recreation next year is going to be the addition of a parks and recreation director. It's going to be funded partially through general fund, park fund, and pool fund. It's going to be a day-to-day operational focused, grant rating as able. I think typically during the fall and winter is when that's going to occur. It's going to reduce current time demands on current administrative staff as well. On the reduced ground staff, we're going to see two things there. We did budget the same, similar to what we spent this year on grounds crews. But we're going to investigate the use of the inmate labor programs at the South Dakota Corrections Office. The school district has been using that very successfully for a number of years. I've spoken with Superintendent Conway about it just a couple of weeks ago. It is a great program for them. I think it'd be a great program for us as well. Some of that ground staff expense is going to be offset by the addition of that Parks and Recreation Director. We got lucky this year. Lauren decided to stay on a little bit longer into the fall. Otherwise, our streets would be putting in their time and efforts on that instead of working on potholes or, in the next month cracks. That's just not a wise use of time. The Parks Board also requested discretionary funding of what we put in the original budget was $22,000. That simply wasn't going to work if we were going to keep that balanced budget in the general fund. So that came down to, I believe, $10,001 and $2,000 in professional services and fees. Our current focus is the softball field drainage improvement. Although Mitch, Bergen City Engineer, and I spoke today during our regular monthly meeting about investigating a further use of the old football field. We're going to need a place to put dirt next year during Central Basin 3. And if we want to fix drainage down there and we want to fix playing conditions for soccer or any other program, next year may be the time to start looking at that as a possibility. On recreation functions, obviously you're going to see a big increase on the recreation administration side. That's where the bulk of our recreation funding goes. $20,000 of the Parks and Recs director or administrator is there. On the parks side, this is really just parks operations, so your groundskeepers, those kinds of things. That was reduced by approximately $8,000. Largely due to those changes in the groundskeeping staff.
If you did, yeah, if you talk, is that kind of thinking about the DOC stuff?
That's without the DOC in there.
Okay,
So,
is there a ballpark to that?
What
or
do we
not?
pay a DOC guy per hour?
I would be shocked if it's over $1.
You would be shocked if it was over $1?
Yes.
And what do we pay currently? Like $10?
And I know you need to vet that but I mean, the school,
Yes.
and obviously there's some oversight, whoever's gonna kind of watch.
Oh,
it.
absolutely.
But it's been,
I haven't talked with Russ Nelson about this yet, but I know others who have, and I've talked to him about how that works. And, you know, the guys that he has are generally, there's not a whole lot of direction they need. They get on a mower and they start mowing.
Happy to be outside.
What's that?
Happy to be
Happy to be outside. Yeah, absolutely.
Check rotors. Yeah, there's a white collar.
Cultural functions, cultural kind of takes together library, museum, and historical society. Library book replacement is really a focus for next year with the school district changing over their elementary library
Yes.
to the new school edition. That's going to change some of our inventory. So we did budget for an additional $2,000 on book replacement. Originally it was 16, we brought that down to 10, and made a few other cuts in other areas to make up for it. The museum tuck pointing project, we're going to have to push that back a year at least. I think we could probably still do similar to what we did this year, another $2,500 match for the Deadwood Foundation grant. But I
he
think
could get that on an annual basis.
I believe he can. If I remember right, talking to Mr. Shreve, the intent this year was to ask for $12,500, and then match that with another $12,500 from the city. I just don't think that's going to happen this year, but it is something we want to keep maintaining. It is a city building. It is a historical landmark. We want to make sure we maintain it to the extent possible. Again, another chart kind of showing the cultural functions for each of these. The senior center is over there as well. This is probably one of those, it's always been done that way things, but the $5,000 we give to community transit typically comes out of that senior center budget. I think largely because there's this assumption that they use it more frequently. I don't know if that's actually the case, but rather than open it up to another department, we're just going to keep it there.
Do they pay rent on that building?
I don't believe they do, no.
But is that a city-owned building?
It is a city-owned building.
Okay.
I think they'd be open to that discussion. I met with their executive director down here approximately a month ago. Obviously a great service to the community, and it is widely used. We want to ensure that we're supporting that. They do operate at a loss right now too, on their Lennox programs. I hate to put a number on it, but if I remember right, it's $11,000 or $13,000 a year that they currently lose. So. And in towns like Lennox, that's not really made up with an FHA, a Federal Highway Administration grant, or Federal Transit grant. In Watertown, Aberdeen, Sioux Falls, Brookings, those other towns that they have, they're eligible for FTA funding, whereas we're too small to receive that. So,
When repairs and upkeep, are they looking at what they have? Are they giving us an inventory of like their furnace and the things that they have to keep?
no, I don't know when the last time we were in there was. I could probably check with Darren and see if there's any inspection that's been done in the last few years. I mean, we're certainly over there enough. I would imagine he and Gene talk on a regular basis, just by proximity. But I don't know what the condition indoors is. Gene did approach me earlier this year when we started talking about the countryside edition and mentioned, you know, there's some question out there as to how many kids we're going to be having in this new countryside edition, because that changes their capacity. And if they have to purchase a new bus, they'd rather know about it now and not 2 years from now when they have to have it. So we've kept those communication lines open and trying to keep informed of what we expect up there.
I guess where I'm going at it is just starting to look at replacement and stuff. It's a building, it's gonna wear down, it's gonna need a new roof at some time, it's gonna need siding. Speaking as a homeowner, this become apparent, and I usually wait as long as I can, but will be, to me, ahead of, that we start talking about our 5-year and 10-year plans and putting it out there. We should have them be also looking at what's gonna wear down, how it's gonna wear down, how we're gonna fund it.
I think anybody who's been in my office knows I keep a couple of examples on my desk as, they're essentially paperweights, but they're good reminders every day. The city has a flail mower on an old, I think it's an old Ford tractor, if I remember right. And I remember walking into the PW shop, must have been January, and they were changing the blades on that thing. And these things were worn down with nubs that I don't think could cut a sheet of paper if you swung hard enough. That's the stuff we want to avoid. We want to make sure that in future years, we're cognizant of the maintenance that needs to happen on these pieces of equipment. We've talked, just initially, one of the things we're going to be bringing up this fall is performance management policies. What are the strategic, operational, and financial goals for each department? How are we going to measure them, benchmark them, and so on and so forth? I think maintenance of the equipment has to be one of those top items on any of those performance management objectives. If for no other reason than we spend an awful lot of money on maintenance and repairs. We have a lot of equipment, some of it old and is going to break down, we get that. We're not quite sure how long some of these trucks are going to last. The park truck is 25 years old, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, mid-90s if I remember right, so it might last another year, it might last 3 years. But
Question. Mr. Fisher,
Yes, sir.
just for clarification, because I've heard ladder truck, city's truck, you do all the maintenance on all those trucks, correct?
It varies on what we can do.
Okay,
Now, if it involves oil changes, maintenance, on that sort of thing, with the tower, Scott Timmerman is our expert in the field with that. Several of our other trucks go to Dave's service.
okay,
If there's opportunities that we can take care of it, and it happens often, and I can't quantify the numbers because we don't track it.
right,
The possibility is, I can tell you, we do a lot of service on all the trucks, whether it's the corporation trucks or the city trucks. Now, I will say, I've looked into a program called My Time, and the city should look into that also. It tracks where employees are and what they are doing. So if I like to quantify times of my firefighters. When they go do an inspection on that vehicle, which we ask them to do once a week, I'd like to have that down there so that we can quantify that and bring that to you. However, it's a difficult thing to do. So yeah, we do all sorts, and some of it is outsourced.
how big a fleet do you have?
The city owns the tower, the platform, and the city pumper that we purchased last year, which is a 1994, which makes that 25 years old. We're talking trucks, how long do they last?
Yeah.
So, and the other 4 trucks are through the incorporation.
Does someone, who told me that? Does the township have one? A grass rig or no?
No,
No,
no.
okay, so
No,
7 total,
6 total.
6 total.
We have
Nice
6.
math.
We've got our grass rig, belongs to the incorporation.
Gotcha.
We've got the rural pumper, which is a 1997. We have 2 tankers. Earl helped me out with the dates of the tankers. One's a 1994 Kenworth.
And the other's an 84.
The other one's an 84 GMC, or correct? That's a Brigadier.
Yeah.
So,
Okay,
and with that, not just only on the, I don't want to overtake the floor, but I also think I should filibuster. But with that, it goes the equipment. The NFPA standard for the hoses and the ISO requirements for our hoses is once a year we have to test it to the NFPA standard. And it takes, I would estimate, 20 hours. And the volunteers do that totally with, there's no labor costs.
Yeah.
So,
okay,
thank you.
yeah, thanks.
Wayne?
Yes, sir.
How long is the standard life of a hose, and how much hose do you have? How long is the standard life of a hose? Or
We've got, in NFPA, ISO has a standard for the amount of hose that's required on the trucks, on it, type 1 engines. And our tower and our city truck are considered type 1 engines because they can carry the manpower. The rural truck, John helped me out because you're very versed on these types, is a type 2 engine because it only carries 3 personnel. Is that correct? Even though has the same pumping capability. Every one of those trucks has 1,000 feet of 5-inch hose. And typically that's a supply hose for us. However, we are training using that as an attack hose as these trenches and streets are open and closed. That's the line that we got to manpower through to get down there and then to break off to our attack lines. So how many feet, we follow what the ISO is, so we got 3,000 feet of 5-inch, we've got 400, 800. I can get you the exact numbers, don't let me guess, I wanna get you the facts.
Sure. And what I just want to know is about the life expectancy of the hose.
It depends on the hose, if it continues to pass the NFPA standard, we can continue to use it. NFPA typically likes to go put a 10-year, you're done on this kind of stuff. But if it continues to pass, and we may have hose in the station that's in the 1970s yet, I believe,
What, that's still in use?
that we still utilize.
I mean, that is up to standard and works
Yes,
correctly?
yes, you're correct, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep,
I think in general, if anybody's been to the fire station, there's a lot of pride taken in the equipment that's there. And, you know, the kind of nice thing about surplusing fire trucks is everybody calls and like, well, I'm sure everything's fine. You know, nobody asks any question about what the pumps are like or anything like that. They know that this stuff is taken very good care of.
And I figured I'd have, I just wanted to know because we're on maintenance of equipment, didn't know how.
I should point out, Mr. Roth must have been using the famous Vanderplats math to come up with the number of
Yes.
trucks there. Economic development functions, there's really just a few items here that we put into economic development. Really no significant changes next year. We're going to continue to support the LADC, Lincoln County Economic Development, as well as working to strengthen our partnership with the Governor's Office of Economic Development and funding partners will continue. Met with the Governor's Office a couple of times this year, and I've been pleased with how those have gone. We do get a couple of opportunities passed our way. We typically have to take a very close look at what kind of interest rate it's going to be because of our sewer, as well as what their water usage is going to be. We're certainly a ways off from what our allotment is with Lewis and Clark. But we don't want to break too far into that. We also don't want to push too much water into that sewer system if we don't have to before we fix some of those significant I-9 issues. Recreation fund, this is currently called the baseball softball fund. Again, will be professionally managed next year. I believe 8,000 or 9,000 of the expenses in this department will be paid to that park and rec director.
Because that person will put together, I'm sorry to interrupt, put together like all the team stuff and that's just becoming a big.
Manage your
isn't it?
website, manage the schedule, manage concessions, manage, you name it.
Yeah.
Everything Parks and Rec is going to be going through that person. It would also, one of the nicer things from my perspective would move the Park and Rec board into more of an advisory role and not so much of an operational volunteer board. That's really not what was intended when these were legislated. They were intended to give community perspective into those programs more than they had been previously. Going to continue to improve park facilities. There's a long list, a long old list of items that need to be improved at the parks. We're going to tackle those when we can this fall, obviously, when we're done with the crack sealing. We're also going to refine those available programs. You know, Park and Rec Board has talked about zoning in a little bit more on, you know, what do we want for these programs? What do we want them to accomplish? What sports do we need to look into? Are there certain expansions or contractions we need to look at? So that'll allow that to happen as well. Recreation fund revenue will be $39,300, and expenses expected to be $39,200 for a net gain of $100. Past few years, we've lost money continually in this fund, and that has to come from somewhere. I think by doing this, I just feel it's more responsible budgeting, and that we try and pay for these as much as possible wherever we can. Additional sales and use tax, this is the second penny that we've talked about. We're going to be investing in infrastructure with this program next year. We've talked to Stockwell engineers, the city engineer, Mitch Mergen, about where those locations might be. We're going to kind of play that by ear right now. I still expect that we're going to have some asphalt repairs next year. So I don't want to get too far ahead of the game there. If you look at Boynton right now, the asphalt looks pretty solid where it's not, you know, completely blown up and removed at this point. The problem is what's underneath. You know, when they were working on Boynton, and we'll cover this in the change order coming up, they got 18 inches down and got to water.
So we ended up having to pull everything out, put more ballast rock in, and then put gravel on top of it. So if that's what's underneath these roads, I expect to see more of this next year, especially if we have a similar winter. The other thing we have to consider is that we still need a swimming pool parking lot. That was not in the original budget for the swimming pool. We don't actually own the parking lot, that's there, that's the school district's lot. We are meeting with the contractor and the school district, I believe next month, to go over how we see that shaking down in terms of cost sharing responsibility. We're going to supplement emergency medical services against, that goes to the ambulance to supplement their shortfall. We also have to repay the 2019 asphalt repairs. If you remember right, we're doing a short-term loan to pay for a portion of the asphalt repairs in 2019, and that must be paid back out of the second penny. So see here our past revenues for second penny. It's climbed reasonably over the last few years. Next year's I bumped up just a little bit more based on some retail forecasts that I was looking at in terms of Kiplinger's does a quarterly and annual forecast. They're expecting 5% retail growth next year. I always hesitate to say that we're going to receive that because a lot of our shopping goes north about 20 miles, and that really does hurt us in the long run. In terms of expenditures, 2018 we didn't spend any money that I can find out of the second penny. 2019 we dedicated just shy of 60,000. Next year we will spend 290 of the 312 that we anticipated receiving. Obviously the rest of that will go into reserve. Third penny fund, this really isn't a significant source of revolving revenue. It's about 25,000 a year. We do need to rebuild that fund balance. We used third penny fund to pay for some of the asphalt repairs this year as well. I think it was approximately $100,000 on a third penny. We're also going to use this to supplement the pool fund losses. So third penny is the bed, booze, and
Beer. No, that's B with booze.
booze.
Breakfast?
That has to be on. I don't
B,
know.
B, and B.
It's 3 Bs, so we're probably getting one of them right. We don't get a ton of that, obviously, it's about 25,000 a year. But that really is, that revenue is intended to go towards what I would call tourist and type expenses.
That's where these hunting folks out in winter, that's where
yes.
they make bank, is that
Winter,
B, B,
Webster, you name it, that's where they get their dollars. And they, in addition, they receive, what do we find, Webster, Webster's sales taxes are almost $1 million a year. Ours are 300.
Fishing?
Yeah, it's seriously, that's the only reason, hunting, outdoor activities. 225 drainage fund, no significant changes. Obviously, this is just a fund that's designated for repayment of drainage improvements in the past. 602 water fund, we're doing no rate increase. We're still going to continue the improvement of infrastructure. Again, talked about earlier about the restructure, adding staff. We'll continue to strengthen that fund balance. Denise and I do want to look at that fund balance and see what we can actually do with it. It is a healthy fund balance north of 600,000 right now. Projects get expensive though, and so when we do have a water project that we need to run, I think it'd be worthwhile to.
And just for the public understands, rate increase is not a surcharge.
Correct. There's a difference between-
Are different,
Yes.
right?
So when I say rate increase, there's no increase in the base rate that you pay on your bill and the usage rate. Usage rate, I think, is 0.053 per cubic foot right now. That one?
Yeah, it is. It's, 53.
Yeah. So, that very little cubic foot is about 7.5 gallons, I believe. So the usage rate is actually very little of a water bill. The surcharge is what typically makes up a larger portion. The surcharge for Central Basin 2 and 3 we've already approved, and there would be no new surcharge next year, obviously, under this budget. So it does account for the surcharge change from 2019, obviously, because we do have new loans to pay back under the SRF. Water fund expense continues to climb, still significantly under water fund revenue though. Our projected net gain for next year is just shy of $124,000. That goes into reserve, and again, we can use that for other funds, but do not have to. And again, if we have an expensive water project in the future, it is nice to have those funds available. Sewer fund, again, no rate increase, that is the base rate that we use. The surcharge, same as with water, will still be in effect. Again, focused on improving infrastructure. When we talk about, when it comes down to the water and sewer side of things, we're really starting to focus more on trenchless technology and what that can do for us for lining sewer pipes instead of total replacement. And that can help us. You know, there may be streets in town that are in pretty decent shape, but underneath them we have some infrastructure that needs to be replaced. We prefer not to pull those streets up to get at that. So we have been talking with Stockwell and obviously all the other engineers that have been presenting about those options. Adding staff due to the restructure, as I mentioned earlier, and improving the fund balance for long-term infrastructure improvement. The sewer fund reserve balance isn't as healthy as I would like to see it. It is probably our lowest fund balance of the enterprise funds. And if you look at our long-term capital improvement plan, it has us dipping into our reserves to make those projects happen. We'll take another look at that when we do our 15-year CIP with Stockwell under the Lennox 2035 plan. But I think in the meantime, any net gain we can get on sewer to rebuild that fund balance is going to be helpful. I would imagine that in the past we probably used sewer fund reserve for Central Basin 1. If I remember right, there's a large cash outlay there. Does anybody remember?
You're talking about Central Basin 1?
Yeah.
Where we put down $1.2 million of cash for some reason.
Yeah. I would imagine a good portion of that came from the sewer fund, and that's probably why it's been depleted. Pool fund, this is going to be an interesting one. We don't quite know what to expect here. The budget that we have is built largely off of what Carruthers gave us for similarly sized pools and similar sized communities. We're going to minimize those operating losses, again with the transfer from third penny. We're going to go for efficient staffing. Some of the models that Carruthers had us looking at had a dedicated person for front desk, dedicated person for concessions. I think we can combine some of that. I really don't think we need to have dedicated positions for those. In the past, we've also had a lifeguard manager or pool manager. That will be done by the park and rec manager or director. So they'll be certified in the testing and the chemicals and everything else that has to happen. We would still have a lifeguard manager, but that would be at a significantly lower rate. We also are going to be increasing the user fees. And I'll have a chart here shortly that I'll show you what we're proposing those fees be. We don't set fees tonight or with the budget. We actually set those by resolution at the end of the year for the following calendar year. With the swimming pool expenses, we obviously expect that to be larger than the revenue it's going to get. How we're going to make up for that is pulling from third penny. So we actually have the swimming pool have an operating gain next year so that we can start building up some of that reserve in the swimming pool fund. Again, we don't 50 years from now want to be in a position where we have to spend another, I love to say it's going to be $1.7 million in 50 years. But we want to avoid those situations. Consistent maintenance, consistent work on improving the facilities. Swimming pool user fees. Went back to Ms. Mauer and a couple other folks who have been involved with the swimming pool committee. They had pulled together data from surrounding communities on what they're charging. Also went out a little bit further. Platt had some data in there. And Platt must be a different town. Quite frankly, they're charging about $150 for a family fee. So I just don't know that that would be the right route for us to take. But I look more at the closer towns. We don't want to make it so that it's unaffordable. We also don't want to push those families that are in between us and another pool to that other pool. We want them to come here to help offset that operating loss. So what you see in front of you is our previous fees and our proposed fees. Most significant difference is obviously going to be on the adults and seniors on the day pass. Senior increased $10 on the season pass. Single, we did eliminate the youth pass and just use a single pass instead. I would imagine most families are going to go for the family pass. That would be the most economical choice by far. that is all I have to present. Open any comments, suggestions, or feedback.
Did the rest of the council look, sorry, have a chance to look at the itemized budget, or you haven't seen that yet, or, I mean, it's in your documents.
I just got it. When were budget packets handed out?
And hard copy?
At the beginning of the budget process, were packets handed out like they've been handed out in past years? Because I did not receive one.
I don't believe they were.
We just got an electronic version, save trees. I guess, I mean, that's where I saw it.
Was it an email, wasn't it?
I don't remember if it was sent an email. The first version would have been shared on board docs for sure, for the finance committee meeting.
Yeah.
And we approve budget by what date, end of October?
End of October. So the first reading of the appropriations ordinance will be September 9. Second would be 23rd.
And these,
I'm not sure what was done previously in terms of budget packets.
these additions to the employees, how did that all come about? I never had a meeting about anything with the park. And you're adding a person to the park committee.
The Park and Rec Board, at their meetings, has discussed this for a number of months. We certainly discussed it internally as well.
Which their meetings are published, like what, second Sunday night? No.
First Sunday night, this week it'll be the second
Okay.
Sunday.
And this is the stage, Jackson, where we look at it and kind of like, I mean, heck, we can look over the next week and a half, and then you start asking questions. But there's gotta be a starting point.
The way I typically look at this too is this is when I start going through it in detail as the budget. We've got our first one in. This is where we look at where the money's proposed to go. We look at where the money needs to go. We got to take into account fire, police, and this is when I go through it. Now, what I'll do is I'll get the hard copy. What I've done traditionally is get this and start really looking at how our money's going. I haven't asked a lot of questions, just take some notes, and I'm gonna go back through and see what we're doing with replacement costs, what we're doing with this, how we're spending that, are we looking at our machinery and replacing that, how are we doing? This is typically one of those type of questions I would really go through it hard.
And and I read the story in the paper today, and Kelly, you've got the budget in the paper, right? Or it's at least electronic?
Well, I just linked it to the board docs.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
In the past, it sounds like committees have been sort of a starting point for budget discussions. I don't know if that's the case. We did update our policies and procedures for city council earlier this year and talked about what the committee purpose is. They certainly can study and propose policy solutions and budgetary considerations, although generally I don't necessarily go to the committees and request that. It's more at the request of the committee.
So this, all these proposals for these additional positions are something you have come up with, or the committee has come up with?
It'd be a combination of input. I mean, in the case of the Park and Rec Board, or the Park and Rec Director, that would have been consideration from the Park and Rec Advisory Board, as well as discussions that we had internally. In terms of the additional water and sewer employee, that would be an internal discussion that we've spoken of, although we have obviously talked here about what the staffing structure looks like there, how it compares nationally to other wastewater treatment facilities. On the additional police officer, that's something that Chief Erickson and I have discussed at length for some time.
And we had a finance meeting where the heads of the departments, fire, police, ambulance, library, this Park and Rec wasn't here.
Park and Rec Board was not here.
To share their next year's budget or where they thought they'd land, or
So when was that meeting?
A couple weeks ago.
a couple weeks ago.
August 22, I think, 26?
Which was,
22.
yeah, which was typically for I mean, it's the finance committee.
Cause I didn't know anything about it.
But are you on the finance committee?
No, but I'm the head of the parks.
Sure.
Is it,
Well, that's up to the parks to get, I mean, I don't know how they communicate or what, and you should point that out to them.
What I also believe and I understand to be, our meetings are now posted.
Yes, all park,
And,
and any city commission or board meeting is now posted.
yeah, by at least 24 hours before the meeting.
Yes.
Posting the standard procedure, it would be posted both on our website and I know it, and also
Yeah.
on the front window.
The law requires, there's a couple of different things the law requires on regular meetings. 24 hours is basically the minimum standard, but that can be violated, I guess I would say, in the case of an emergency. If we need to have an emergency meeting, the law basically says as soon as it's practical to provide notice. For emergency and special meetings, we're also obligated to notify our newspaper of record. But otherwise, committee meetings generally follow the same process that we do for others.
And these are open to public, correct?
Yep.
So then, did you discuss anything about employee wage increases?
We've discussed it a little bit internally, but employee wages are not set until the first meeting in January. So the only full discussion we've really had on it is the 2.4% cost of living adjustment. The budget does have wage increases included in it as presented tonight, but those are certainly nowhere near complete at this point. And that's something that would need to have council approval on the resolution as well.
And so that 2.4% is for everyone.
Correct. It's a cost of living adjustment.
Any more? Then I would look at new business, a motion to adjourn?
Can I get a point of order first for you? Mayor?
Yes.
You say on meetings are required to be posted with the agenda. The letter I did not see on board docs. Why was that presented tonight? And right prior to the meeting, the city administrator said he has changed the agenda on the board docs to meet the meeting. That's not 24-hour meetings. Is this a legal meeting? Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, certainly it's a legal meeting. We posted the agenda well in advance. The mistake that was made was that the agenda that was on board docs included a resolution that had been requested. That posting, that update was not posted on the window up front as is required by law. And so obviously we cannot consider that resolution.
So the letter, can I receive that letter, a copy?
Of course,
That
yeah.
you read there, was that on the board docs? Is that,
That's a good question. It was not on the agenda that's posted.
It was not, although.
please deal in the facts. Please deal in the facts and do the fact checks.
Thank you.
I don't think all comments that are included at a city council meeting are required to be posted on the agenda.
I don't think they're just points of information. There's no, if
There's no action.
if there's no action taken. But I could be wrong, but I can, what you're.
I'd be happy to run that by the city attorney.
Sure.
Please run it by the city attorney. And if we're wrong, we'll still post it.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, second by Sam, Chad, Robert, Sam, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same side. Motion carries.
Sewer thing, I'm like, I didn't realize everyone was behind me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Earl.
That's a large concern.
Oh, shoot.
It's been busy today.
Hey, thanks, man.
Last couple weeks.
I ran into the call, had a call the other day to get a call. I asked him, the call, had a call,
Just for access to us.
I will find out.
Twice now I've gone to school.
You told me Mike Anderson called.
And I haven't done.
Was it about tonight or is there something else?
No, it was just pillow call.
Oh, yeah.
I need to do it. I was gonna tell you, I'm not calling back.
We tried.
No, I don't think anybody did. I did, but, oh, no, she called. Yeah, she called shortly after you guys started getting messages.
Are they just working on the event right now, or are they working on something?
So I'm just gonna tell you, I wasn't calling.
Okay, so between first and.
All right.
Which we haven't taken Lincoln for months now, because it's so
And I haven't heard where they're exactly.
Gotcha, cool. That works, just curious.
Is there a reason? Yeah, right. The reason is because that industry changes so often that all of a sudden you could be buying. We used to buy four. Let's say we got $30,000 for 7,000 apiece. So we could buy four of these. I read the following year, we tried to buy four, I think we had 10, whatever manufacturer. So we always go after, we're in October, I've got a representative from the company coming in. However, that industry changes so quickly that all of a sudden, this piece of machine may not have to buy. Now, we're firefighters. Oh, sure. And you need this. Yeah. So I still think that where, I just don't think that's for sure, the district agrees on seeing where. And I sent them a picture of the, like the different, like there's like 9 months. I said, which one? But he had talked to me about, well, if this guy, the parts, change it all. There are only, right now, there's only one item. Here's all the industry, and that's called the universal. I go with all different SCBA. Outside, no, it's fine. I don't think Griffin, you should wrap it interventions. Yeah, that's a lot of it, plug in, some extra. Which is good, but right now, that's the only thing. Right, so our industry is going, it's not gonna.
So.
This addition in 2000.
You know what I just thought of?
Now, the NIOSH and I'm not recognized. It's kind of a hazardous situation for firefighters. Yeah,
I have nothing to say on it.
It's kind of nice.
We should probably visit about your truck tomorrow.
That should be the next thing that's standard in that industry. That's a great thing.
I don't know.
I got something. Yep, you bet. Yep.
Because otherwise, I mean, I could cavity go in. But I got, yeah, I've got further.
I don't know if I can, anything here.
Did they move her?
Monday I've got some stuff that will, Monday I got some stuff that, I need to sit down and chat with you about.
Okay.
I've been,
I didn't do
on the phone the past 2 days at Motorola. Pretty soon, the sign outside the town's gonna say the city of Lennox, sponsored by Motorola.
Well, yep.